Welcome into Basketball by Association. It's all about basketball and certain associations. My name is Arky Shea. That over there is Joel C. Cordes. Joel, which association are we featuring today?
Well, I'm Joel Cordes, and that's my associate, Arky Shea. So I think that's the one we're featuring. Is that we're back in action, and it's nice to see you again. Nice to be able to talk basketball. And
It's nice to talk after the Knicks are white hot or were lightning white hot. And then
I'm going to ask you about them. I actually have a question and a perfectly respectable question teed up for the Knicks without much shade, though I'll throw some Tom Thibodeau shade in there, but I mean that's just a quick little preview of some of the things we're going to get to.
Yep. So I'm excited for today's here podcast as we get set for the end of the 2022 calendar year. Mm-hmm. The cool thing is, though, this is technically when basketball turns into a real thing for people for the most part. Yeah. Christmas Day is sort of that unofficial begin of a lot of people paying attention to the sport, even though the Knicks were winning before that. So we will address a lot of the stuff there in the time we have allotted. Joel C. Cordes, let's get it going. What's up, partner? You usually got something special for us at the top.
Yeah, I assume we'll talk a little bit about Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic and, maybe Giannis and
Are those guys still
the
playing?
MVP race. We'll talk about the Nets, I would assume, at some point here, the hottest team in the league, and Kevin Durant maybe making an MVP push. But we do have to name the episode. This is episode 128. We're in a nice little stretch here based on playoff games logged, where the choice is easy because there's only one guy at each of these spots. Last time it was Brian Shaw at 127. There was just nobody else to choose from. Same thing here. And we're still in that sweet spot too, where it's guys that they don't belong in the same conversation as many of the Hall of Famers amongst them, but it's still pretty cool that they would be able to get to 128. In fact, today's is a perfect example of this. You probably will be able to guess him once I get to the latter clues, but this is a guy who, well, he had a 14-year career, which is nothing to shake a stick at, but he never averaged more than 8 points per game in his career. And in fact, by the time he was 27, it looked like his career was going to be done, over with. He was drafted by the Phoenix Suns, played 3.5 seasons with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then did a season in Orlando with Shaq, where this guy was coming in with the reputation of a three-point shooter at a time in the early 90s when the three-point shot was just starting to gain some traction. But in the handful of games, 47 games that he logged in Orlando, he made a whopping 25% of his three-point shots while he was there. And his career probably should have been done. But it wasn't done, because from that point on, he went on to win 5 NBA championships and is considered one of the all-time great winners as a role player and knocked down some of the biggest shots in NBA playoff history. And he wasn't done winning rings after his playing career was over. Would you like to take a guess? And I've purposely not included which teams he won rings with, but there's a clue there as well that it was multiple teams. Because if I go any further with these clues, you're going to get who this is right away.
Well, that's the point, right? To eventually be able to get it. Because it's not supposed to be a secret episode.
Right.
Where to go? Oh, no, you didn't. You're not telling me. So he won
Phoenix, Cleveland, and then Orlando.
Right.
And he was
now the secret teams.
6 of 24 from downtown in Orlando. 6 of 24 in 47 games in which he appeared, despite his reputation of supposedly being a three-point shooter. He is currently involved. He's currently involved in the NBA and has won multiple championships in his current involvement.
Not Steve Kerr.
It's Steve Kerr, yeah.
Steve Kerr played in Orlando?
He played in Orlando the season before he went to Chicago. So 92-93, he was on the Magic. I had kind of forgotten this too. And they mentioned this just briefly in the Big Dance, or it might have been in the this Magic moment 30 for 30 with Shaq and Penny. There was a brief little mention of, oh yeah, we had Steve Kerr, but he couldn't hit a shot. And like, yeah, then he goes to Chicago. They take a chance on him. And the rest, as they say, is history. 5 NBA championships from the time he was 28 through 37, 3 with the Bulls, and then got a couple with the Spurs. And then, of course, the coaching championships as well with the Warriors.
Huh. Okay. At first I was I felt like there was some hinting going toward like Robert Horry.
Right. Yep. That was the other possible guy.
But I couldn't remember if one of those two guys had gotten to Orlando, and I didn't think either one had gotten to Orlando. But wow, okay. Look, I learned something today. Steve Kerr shot 24 threes in Orlando and made 6 of them, and is now considered one of the best sharpshooters during the Bulls run of the mid to late 90s.
And not only did you learn something new, but you got it right on the first guess. So we'll give the little golf clap to you.
I almost said, like, I felt like I almost went Robert. So I was thinking Robert Horry first, but I will still take credit for that.
So. Both of those guys did log time in Portland and San Antonio, although Horry might not have been in Portland. Spurs connection for sure. I'll have to go back and look on Horry. He bounced around so much. I don't think he was in Portland. Anyway, let's move on. We'll talk current basketball. I know you've got stuff teed up. Do you want to start with
Robert
your
Horry
Knicks?
played Houston. I'm trying to think. I know it was Houston before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Right, but then he got San Antonio. He got LA.
Yep.
There's at least a couple others in there too.
Phoenix. Phoenix.
He was in Phoenix. He was part of the Jayson kid and the Barkley trade originally. And then
that's true. That's right. Yeah, that's right. I think
that landed him in Phoenix, but he wasn't there for very long, maybe like a season and a half.
Did he make 6 threes on 24 attempts? Because then we'd be right, except for the little.
What's so crazy is the amount of total attempts when you go back and look at these sharpshooter guys from the early 90s, and they're all like, about 80 threes, maybe 100 was a big number if you attempted 100 threes in a season. And then you look at today and it's like, you're getting to 83s in 8, 9, 10 games for some of these guys. Like it's insane.
That's why some people are like, maybe we should get a 4-point shot, which is, not the craziest thing. I bet people thought a 3-point shot was crazy before it came up in the late 80s. So I mean,
they did. And there's still certain old heads like Greg Popovich, but even there was a guy that I coached with here, a high school basketball coach, who just loathes the 3-point line. But he worked his offense around it, much like Pop did. He dealt with it, but he would constantly say, if I could go back and get rid of this, I would do this in a heartbeat. But it's what it is.
It is where we are in 2022, going into 23. And where we could have been going is the white-hot New York Knicks. And just before we got a chance to start recording, which we should have been able to last week, they started losing. But that's okay, because they are still technically playoff bound as of right now. Like, it's still in the they're in the play-in right now. But listen, this time last week, we were talking about a team that was battling for home court.
Yeah.
And now
and like 3 weeks ago was battling just to be in the play-in.
Yes, so they've been a little hot or cold. I only want to start with them because they won't get much more discussion for being on a 9-game heater at any point this year. I do not foresee that happening. But let me just ask you the question, Joel. Are the Knicks the best team in the NBA?
No, that I will not say. However,
that is rude. That's a Tom Thibodeau bias. That's what I hear.
You start to see something coming together that seems sustainable to make them a credible threat again, which they were not last year, but they were a couple seasons ago when Tibbs finally, when Tibbs arrived there and you got that first year Tibbs bump, which has typically been a thing at his other stops. And you start to see more of an identity now and more of a pecking order, and Jalen Brunson's arrival and ability, I think, to live up to the contract. I mean, I've asked you about this early in the season, but now that you've gotten 25, 30 games to look at him, I don't sense from the New York media market or other fans that I've talked to, and maybe you want to chime in on this, I don't sense any buyer's remorse with Jalen Brunson. And there was that a little bit of skepticism, like, all right, we're going to hand a big contract to a guy who was a backup somewhere else, and we're going to be giving them this huge role, and we're not exactly sure how he fits next to RJ Barrett and Julius Randle. but we think it'll be okay. And that sort of guessing game with contracts has usually bitten the Knicks pretty hard. But in this case, he seems to do exactly what a Tibbs offensive player should do, and he's been credible defensively, and he's a tough guard. And so you get the sense that Tibbs is like trusting him a lot and maybe seeing some of the things that he loves so much about Derrick Rose, but just in that younger and more readily available player typically than D Rose at this point in his career.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any buyer's remorse. He's having the best year scoring wise of his young career. What's he, 5 years in, 4 years, 5 years in, something like that.
Yeah.
He's, like you say, he's doing really well defensively. He's tossing out just as many as assists, more assists, I think, than he's ever done. So he's having a career. He's earning it in year one. He is earning his bank right now. He is absolutely earning his bank. They are so much stronger at that position than they were the last couple of years. It is
20 points per game, 6.5 assists, a steal per game. Yeah.
Yeah, it is night and day. They have the makings of that team of a lot of good years ahead of them, the next 3-4 years. If Julius Randle continues to be that poor man's MVP from 2 years ago, last year he regressed, and attitudinally after he got that big contract, he regressed a little time. But he corrected. He corrected on the back end of the season, and so far this year it's been really good for them again. Jalen Brunson, as I said, has been a big upgrade for them. RJ Barrett, I've told you forever, I love RJ Barrett. I do
too.
I think he's a wonderful, wonderful piece. And I think that there's something there. I don't know how good necessarily they are right now for a deep playoff run this year, but I can't put it against them because this team as constituted now, I think is physically better than the one 2 years ago, which was the team that was very surprisingly good and very surprisingly, getting ousted, unfortunately, by Trae Young in the Garden, but is a team that I think is set up much better to be effective in the postseason this year.
Well, and I think it's about guys being able to slot into more comfortable, realistic roles now. 2 years ago, it was Julius Randle, like you said, poor man's MVP. Everything was running through him, and they rode him as hard as they could. And you saw some of the cracks appear in that playoff series where it was just too much. And they did not have other guys capable of stepping up. RJ Barrett was not there yet in his career. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a bona fide number 2 in his career, although that would be the expectation from somebody who was taken so high. But the ability is there to be that number 2 guy on certain nights. And that's why you have Jalen Brunson, because the thought is that he can be the guy on other nights. And now this allows Derrick Rose to move to a bench role, not playing starters minutes, either as a legit starter or coming off the bench. Way less time for Evan Fournier is a good thing, because when he is at 20 minutes per game, he's a really nice, usable kind of Swiss Army type offensive player. When you start to get him up into 25, 30 minutes a game, again, the cracks show. Obi Toppin, I know, has been hurt a lot, but has shown some things and is a guy that you don't mind having in the second unit whatsoever, because he brings a lot of kind of the pop in the bat that Julius Randle gives you, just in slightly different ways, but you're not really changing the game plan when Toppin is in. Quickly has shown that he can play. Quentin Grimes has shown that he can play. We still don't know what Cam Reddish is, and I don't know if it's going to be in New York that we find out. But I really want to give a little bit of shine to the center tandem of Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein, who they're not world beaters, they're not game changers necessarily, but they're holding down that spot, and it's no longer a question mark of what you're going to get. Whereas just a couple of years ago, even when it was Robinson and Nerlens Noel, it was like, all right, there's worse guys out there than this, but I still don't know if Mitch is going to be ready and in the right headspace to be effective every night. And it seems like with the two of them now, there's some certainty at the position and enough to get by, even though this is a league with a lot of really, really good centers, a handful of whom are going to be Hall of Famers first ballot. And no, Mitch Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein are not in that conversation whatsoever. But I think now it's about certainty, and it's about looking at the roster and going, we are 10 deep. and we have 3 different guys who can score 20 points per game, that is typically enough to at least be able to win a playoff first round series. Again, matchups are super important, but I can say it with a straight face that New York is capable of winning a first round series this year.
Oh man, bless you for saying that. Bless you so very much, Chelsea Cordes, for saying that. And I completely agree. And you mentioned Quentin Grimes. Dude went for 33 in that game against Dallas. That'll be referenced here in just a moment. Mitchell Robinson, as you mentioned, had a double-double in that game with 20 and 15 or 16 or something like that in that game. Like that's production that consistently that you can't expect all the time, but you can see. Like there isn't the if it's not Julius, where's the big numbers coming from the big size? You're just not gonna. Now you have dudes that can get just some, and Jalen Brunson opens up the floor for guys like RJ Barrett. He wasn't in that Dallas game, but having a Quentin Grimes alongside him, as he said, went for 33 in that game. This roster is constructed probably the best overall roster construction since
Carmelo and Amari, right?
The Carmelo playoff run. Yeah, it would have to be. They're long played some of those big contracts. I know Knicks fans and myself are a little gun shy when you don't get the biggest name for the big contract because given a whole bunch of bad dudes, a bunch of bad contracts that are triple digits. But Jalen Brunson, at least so far, we're a third of the way into year one, working out pretty nicely. So.
Absolutely. And back to Robinson real quick. I think you're seeing him now hitting that point of his career where he's considered a veteran. He's been on the Knicks roster for a while. He's been playing with Julius Randle for a while. And it's less of, there's that young upside guy. I'm really, more concerned about how good he can be. And I'll overlook the mistakes because we're just future. There's a lot fewer of those mistakes now. And yeah, the upside doesn't seem as high as maybe Knicks fans talked themselves into a couple years ago, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be. And when you get a completely different look in Hartenstein, who's much more of an offensive geared player, but is not, terrible on the defensive end, just like Robinson can finish a play on the offensive end, but he's there more for his rebounding and shot blocking. You get those different looks and you get different options. And I'd have to go back and look at the Amari Stoudemire, Chauncey Billups, Carmelo Anthony, that whole group, and see, J.R. Smith was there too. That was a roster, and probably the last one with the Knicks that I really liked also. There was a lot of holes in that second unit, and you could make the case, I may have to put them side by side, you could make the case that this might be a more complete roster than that one, just maybe not quite as, top high-end talent because they had 2 guys in Stoudemire and Carmelo that were MVP caliber at various points in their career, and right now you've just got Julius.
While we're on the team that just recently played this fella, let's talk about Luka Doncic, and let's talk about what happens when you do what is arguably the greatest triple-double in NBA history. 60, 20, was it 21 and 17? Is the numbers?
21 and 10.
21 and 10. Okay.
Yeah, 60, 21 and 10.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make it seem like he was good or anything. That's my fault.
With a couple steals and a block in there as well, which Luka he made sure to include in the press conference. It's like, don't forget I had those 2.
I don't want to overlook the fact that the Knicks should have won that game. Very much should have won that game and definitely blew it. It did happen, but I just kind of want to. I guess we can sort of, if you want to mention that and your thoughts on it, because that made me sad. If you want to mention that, and then we can sort of go into, I think, a bigger conversation, which is where we are a third of the way into the year, considering there's some really high-level play happening in the NBA this year from a lot of different dudes. And Luka's one of those dudes that just had an MVP performance on top of an MVP-type season he's having, with already MVP-level stardom underneath his feet right now.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an asterisk for me in that he pulls off that triple-double in an overtime game, which always you have to recognize it helps you pad the stats just a little bit more.
But it wasn't 4 overtimes or something like that.
That's absolutely true.
And it was a magnificent performance from him that even got them to the overtime.
Yes, absolutely. And the Knicks were a little undermanned. I think RJ Barrett played 2 minutes in that game.
Yeah.
Brunson didn't play, I believe, in that one in his return to Dallas. And the Mavericks were missing one or two guys. They don't have Dorian Finney-Smith right now, so they had Christian Wood in the starting lineup. Maxi Kleber is out long term. None of that really matters. It's the Luka Doncic story. And yeah, the Knicks kind of blew that one, but that's a tough thing to say, oh, they blew it when you have an all-time great performance that happens against you. Sometimes a great player like
these all-time performances happen in the last 30 seconds of a game.
Yeah.
Not cool.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that sort of thing from a Kobe or an MJ or, you know, some of these really top flight scorers, a Kevin Durant, a Steph Curry, there literally is nothing you can do, and you are just a prisoner of that historic moment and that historic play. And that was a Luka thing. And it got me thinking over the last couple of days after rewatching the highlights of Luka, and I've watched a bunch of Nuggets games lately just because Jokic has been so good. I've seen the Bucks a little bit and just kind of looking through the different MVP candidates, but it really got me to a different thought about what makes these MVP guys. And shot making in the NBA obviously is at a premium, and to be a really good player, you got to be a shot maker that's better than all the other really good ones in your league. But one of the things that really is sticking out to me about the MVP caliber guys is their ability to get to their spot, to get to their shot, the look that they want, which because they're a shot maker, they have a great chance of making. But to get to that spot regardless of what the defense does.
Yeah.
And with a guy like
on that real quick, LeBron, I was talking, says he thinks Luka's like his favorite player in the NBA right now. He had a cool clip moment that came out that I can't remember when he actually said it. He said the thing about Luka is that it doesn't matter. He can walk the ball up the floor 10 straight times at his pace and still find his spot and still get to his spot knowing he can do it. And you can't do anything about it. The dude's a monster.
Yeah, and you see that on the tape. All you have to do is watch the highlights to see him get into his shot package. But if you watch an entire game, you see that as well. Like, Luka is not fast. He's big and he's strong for a guard, which creates a lot of mismatches. He's an excellent ball handler, but not in the way that a Steph Curry or a Kyrie Irving is. He controls the ball and he controls his pace and he understands leverage and he understands angles. And he doesn't get that high off the floor to overpower somebody, but he is tall enough to look over the defense. And there certainly is that understanding of angles and all that stuff, but there just is that inevitability of him getting to his spot. And if you are so lucky as to have walled him off to somehow keep him away from that spot, well, then he's just making the correct pass to the open guy or open guys because it took three to pack the paint. And that, I think, is the similarity to him and Nikola Jokic. And in some ways, it's the similarity to Kevin Durant when you talk about the MVP caliber stuff. You watch Jokic, and it's the same thing. He's walking it down. Now, he's obviously got a much bigger size advantage. His ball handling is phenomenal for a center, but it's not world-beating in the whole NBA sense. Yeah, he's a good shot maker, but a lot of it is just, I'm going to get down to the block when it's my turn to score. He's got that Kevin Love low center of gravity, peak Minnesota fat Kevin Love, where you cannot get him out of the paint no matter what you do. And you are throwing 7-foot NBA athletes who maybe even weigh as much as he does, and they cannot get him out of there. And he's got that soft touch. And if you somehow keep him out of that shot, he's making the pass. Durant, it's the same thing in a slightly different way. Like, Durant's a string bean still at this point in his career, even though he's much stronger. He's an excellent ball handler, but he's not going to kill you off the dribble. He's not going to kill you with speed. He's got that massive height advantage, and that works. And the wingspan, of course, to see up over the defense. But so many times when you watch Durant, it's not just about him out-talling people or out-jumping people. He still is getting to his spots. Maybe it's ahead of the dribble or it's ahead of the ball getting to him and him running off screens. So in that slightly different way, but he gets there. There's nothing you can do about it. And once he's there, he is knocking that shot down. And it is a little bit different compared to a peak LeBron or a Giannis where they get to their spots because of power. It's just sheer overpowering you with that strength, that athleticism. Certain other guys do it with the dribble. Steph Curry gets to his shots with the dribble or running off screens and that sort of thing. So Luka belongs in this category because even somebody like Joel Embiid, the numbers are there and the whole package of stats is there. And if he's healthy, to be in that MVP conversation. But you can, it's hard, but you can keep Joel Embiid from getting to his spots. It is possible. You can dupe him into tougher looks. And it's much more so the difference than of like just a straight all-star like Karl Anthony Towns, where you can keep Towns from getting to his spots. And that's when he creates the offensive fouls and the stupid plays and that sort of thing. And it's that difference there that is separating really good all-star stat stuffers to me versus these MVP guys who, you know, some of them, of course, too, like Giannis, are stacking the defensive categories as well.
Well, talk to me a little bit here. Who at this point is your MVP? Now, has your opinion changed yet?
By the day.
Almost. Yeah, it's hard literally after you see Luka's performance not to say he's the guy this moment, right? But it is, this season feels so much more fluid than the last few seasons as far as the level that the top 4 or 5 dudes are putting in every single night. And then they're all high level. You're not seeing a bunch of bad games from Jokic or Doncic or Embiid or Durant. But then you'll see one extraordinary game from one of them, and like with Doncic, and you're like, oh, okay, well, right now he's the MVP. But like Durant can put up 50 tonight, you know, and you're like, well, yeah, that dude's worth it.
And we haven't even mentioned Jayson Tatum yet, who's been in this conversation, you know, for being so high in the scoring category. And really the thing that switched for Tatum over the last 2 years is his ability to get to whatever spot he wants now. Tatum doesn't have the defensive stats that like a Joel Embiid does. He's not averaging a triple-double like Jokic. You know, Giannis has got his defensive stats. Luka, it's all across the board. Tatum is a scorer. And you might go, well, Kevin Durant's only a scorer. Durant, and we'll talk about the Nets in a little bit here, Durant's doing so much more than scoring. There's a lot of stat stuffing going on there on both ends, but Durant is really shining on the defensive end for a team that is figuring out they might be better defensively than they are offensively and hanging their hat on that, which is really cool to see from a Nets team that was dead in the water. I just want to point back to the fact that, like, it's been about 2 weeks since you and I did a show. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how no teams were really like in a groove yet. There weren't any good front runners. New Orleans was doing some things and Boston was doing some things. But underneath that, it was like, when is anybody going to get a run and take advantage? And even like a month ago, when we talked about MVP candidates, it was really just 2 guys. It was Giannis and Jokic. That was really it. Everybody else was like maybe kind of in the conversation. You know, you mentioned Durant, I mentioned Jayson Tatum. We both were like, yeah, we love Joel Embiid. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And now, like you said, day to day, somebody else is jumping out front. We're like, oh, well, maybe it's him. Now I better watch another day because it's going to be somebody else. Like, we all of a sudden have gone, and this is what happens in the NBA as you start to settle into, you know, as you said, after Christmas, like the real season, the teams that were supposed to be really good start to separate themselves because they can package together a 6-game winning streak, an 8-game winning streak, maybe a double digit. And the MVP guys really start to shine as chemistry finally comes together after you spend an offseason revamping so much of your roster, dealing with the offseason injuries, that sort of thing. So, yeah, who's my front runner? I think right now, very quietly, it's Nikola Jokic, but that would be 3 straight. And I might have some viewer bias in just that I've watched more of his games recently than anybody else's. And just continue to be blown away by the fact that, like, the Nuggets have not been at full strength, but they're getting closer and closer. Michael Porter Jr.'s back. Jamal Murray's been back for a while, but he's been rusty. He gives you one good game and then like 3 or 4 duds where he just doesn't look right, but he's slowly shaking that off. The Nuggets roster finally has some defenders and Bruce Brown and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I don't know if they're deep enough overall. I think they're just barely deep enough when fully healthy. But Aaron Gordon's having the best season of his career. It still all hinges around Jokic's ability to quarterback that offense, to be absolutely immovable when he has the ball and to get those spots. But, you know, and some of it might be recency in that the Bucks have lost 4 straight. They haven't looked very good. Boston's cooled off a little bit. I think Kevin Durant's making the biggest push out of anybody else. Luka was there because of the 60-point game, and he's had a lot of really monumental games this season, but Dallas is still sitting in 7th in the West, even though they're on a little bit of a tear too.
That's always sort of been the albatross around Luka, right? Is that like the team just doesn't give you all the victories to be able to pump yourself up into, I don't want to say serious consideration, because you still are serious consideration, but to say, hey, this team is really good and Luka is the reason because this engine hums. Let me ask you, who do you think the betting favorite is right now? And then we'll move on.
Betting favorite's got to still be Luka, right? I mean, because he was kind of the golden boy at the beginning of the season, and we talked about that in the season previews about, you know, the narrative is going to kind of push for him this year. It's just the natural progression of where he's been, and other guys have won it recently, and, you know, he is one of the heir apparents to the league. It's got to still be him, right? Or is it Giannis now?
The betting favorite is Jayson Tatum.
See,
plus
dumb.
280 right now. Number 2 is Giannis at plus 360. Luka is plus 440. Then Nikola Jokic is plus 500. Then Kevin Durant plus 850. Joel Embiid plus 1100. Then it's Zion, Ja Morant, both at plus 3000.
Here's what I don't love about that. And again, it always feels like backhanding Jayson Tatum, because I'll always be like, oh yeah, he's really good, but he's not doing this. Jayson Tatum is 5th in the league in scoring right now. Scoring is what he's going to hang his MVP candidacy on. Yep. Yeah, he'll get you some rebounds and he moves the ball. He's a good player. He's not a bad defender by any means, but he's 5th in scoring. And ahead of him is Giannis. Number 2 is Luka. Number 1 is Joel Embiid. Those 3 guys are all MVP candidates doing more in the category that Jayson Tatum is supposedly hanging his hat on. That doesn't make sense for him to be the betting favorite still. No. Don't put your money on that.
I agree with you right now. I mean, granted, there was a stretch for about 6 or 7 weeks where like it looked like his name was etched on that trophy. Like he was playing spectacular, and it was all
shot maker. Like he is a shot maker.
And the Celtics were lightning hot out of the gate for the huge chunk of the beginning of the season. They've cooled a little more recently, but they're still a really good team. Okay, I want to move on. Can I ask you about a bad situation that I want your thoughts on?
Absolutely.
What do we make of the Warriors? They've won 3 in a row, but like they're 18 and 18. I think they're 10th or 11th in the West right now.
Yeah.
We can't keep blaming injuries because this team's relatively healthy.
I mean, Steph is out and Clay.
Well, I mean, not the whole season. I mean, like they haven't been. Yeah. They've been 500 at best for the entirety of the season. It's not like they started 11-0 and then they backtracked because of Steph. So, let me ask you this: are we ready to say that we're this dynasty's done? And I don't want to sort of put the dirt on their grave necessarily, but if you add all the factors of injuries that they have had, age. Maybe they put all their eggs into last year's basket, the return basket that we talked about. We thought was there. Maybe that was their swan song. Maybe this dynasty is just done, and they've had a wonderful stretch. If it is, like it's been a tremendous, but they all do come to an end at some point.
Yeah, to me, it's 2 separate problems. One at the beginning of the season was a shift in chemistry. You had a lot fewer veterans in key minutes. And now instead of last year where they were just showcasing young guys like Moses Moody and Jonathan Kuminga, now those guys were having to play major minutes and they were not ready for it at the beginning of the season. The older veteran players were doing what they were supposed to do. Clay continues to look better and better when he's available, but he's missed some time now again. And then you had the injuries set in. Steph has been gone for weeks. Clay has been in and out of the lineup. Draymond's missed some games, and you've got that age stuff. And the younger guys are playing a little bit better. Jonathan Wiseman got sent down to the G League to try to get back into, I think, game shape mentally. The young guys are playing a little bit better. Dante DiVincenzo has given them some good minutes recently, but you don't have the top flight firepower. So I said at the beginning of the season, I thought this was going to be their last ride as far as being a championship contender. Obviously, they're nowhere close to that right now. And as long as they're sitting 26th in points allowed per game defensively, and I know there's a whole lot of different defensive metrics that you can look at, and points allowed is kind of out of vogue at this point, but it's the simplest one to look at. The point is they're not playing well defensively, and that's been something that typically they've been sneaky good at. Offensively, when you flip it, like they're middling, they're fifth in points scored, but when you're that bad defensively, it doesn't matter that you're fifth. Like they need to be 15th defensively, 12th defensively, at least in the upper half to allow the points that they score to mean something. Right now they don't, and they haven't been great in the clutch, especially without Steph Curry. So, long answer to a short question. They're not a contender now. I'm not ready to put the nail in the coffin until I see whether Steph gets back, the veterans can be healthy for a stretch, and now the young guys have kind of settled into their roles. I'll make a judgment based off of that if we ever get to that point. But at 18-18, you start to get around 40 games in, and you go, if it hasn't happened by now, it might never happen this year. And this may just be the year that it doesn't. I think they'll maintain the ability to surprise us as long as their big three is together and the young guys are still there. But the price tag associated with this group doesn't make this a sustainable thing. Like they're going to have to move on from Draymond at some point, or move Clay, or they're going to have to start to move some of the young guys as they earn bigger contracts. And that's going to be the end of it.
I think you bring up a good point. Most people sort of look at the All-Star break in February as sort of the halfway point of the season, but it's not.
Mm-hmm. It's
like
the 2/3.
We're on top of the halfway point of the season,
Mm-hmm.
and there's been a lot of time to sort of start figuring some of this stuff out. And I know that there's injuries and there's age. Let me posit one other theory, one alternate theory to this team. Last year was, as you and I correctly predicted, I like to keep pointing that out, that was the Remember Us tour, right?
The FU tour.
Yep. We're still Golden State. We still got the firepower. We're still going to be able to run down your throat. And they did for a large chunk of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And then we saw what they got throughout the playoffs into the championship. So let me ask you this. What if that was that year, right? Last year was that year to prove, hey, after all this quote-unquote time away, we're back.
Mm-hmm.
Now that they know that they are old,
mm-hmm.
but old in general as far as their core is concerned, they have a ton of miles on them, including playoff miles. What if they're just not in a hurry to figure things out right now, this part of the season? What if they want to give that youth on that team more opportunities? What if they're not interested in rushing a Steph Curry back or needing Draymond to play ginormous minutes? Like Clay just progress along. And by the time we get to All-Star break, as long as we stay in the 8, 9, 10 spot, we could go on a nice little run, guarantee ourselves a playoff spot in the top 6. And then we're still going to be super dangerous if we're all healthy. Do you think perhaps that there is we've logged a lot of miles, let's slow play this now? We proved we already done it. Now we're here for the championships as long as we can sustain them. And this is the best way we can.
I would say, given the injuries and inconsistent play, I would be surprised if this is by design, but it may be a alternate option and a blessing in disguise that they can go that route. I mean, let's be real.
At the beginning of the season, they were cold out the gate too, right?
Yeah.
So, and maybe injuries have forced them. Yeah, you say like that may have been an idea, but now the injuries are there, and then maybe they say, okay, we know we got the dudes. We just got to wait on everybody to get healthy. So let's not rush anybody, and let's just get to the best place we can by mid-late February.
What team in the Western Conference, New Orleans, Phoenix, Memphis, at Denver, any of those good teams, realistically, the Clippers, is going to go, we want a fully healthy Warriors team in the playoff. We want to see those guys. No, nobody wants that.
And they're right now, we'd say that they're 18-18 and they're, 10th in the West. they're a game and a half out of guaranteed playoff spot.
Right.
So I mean, it's not inconceivable. They just aren't playing the way that we're used to seeing them playing, and nobody's running away with the West at this point. I mean, New Orleans is playing really, really well. They're tied at the top up there, and Memphis has played really well recently. Denver's played really well, but we've seen what Denver has done to us.
Clippers are finally getting hot now that Kawhi is healthy.
Right. We've seen what Denver has done to us year in and year out whenever we try to believe in them. Like, do you think the Clippers, or do you think the Nuggets, or do you think the Jazz, anybody excited to see that Golden State team for a 7-game series?
No,
I
nobody.
think you're right.
Nobody wants to see them in a single game in the play-in either. Dallas, Portland, Utah, like anybody who's there in that slot right now, nobody wants to see them. However, let's just put the asterisk on this. We've said this about some other really good teams in the past. We said it about the Heat for a couple of years. Nobody wants to see them in the playoffs. We said it about the Lakers, even when the Lakers were walking wounded a couple seasons ago after the championship. Sometimes that's very true. And then sometimes that's just a paper reputation, and you get into that wrong matchup and you're like, ooh, that team was dead meat kind of right from the start, and we were talking ourselves into believing otherwise, and either based on the matchup or just based on the point. Like, if Golden State gets into the playoffs and they're not fully healthy, obviously if Steph is not able to get back this year, or they're missing a Klay Thompson, or even if they miss a Jordan Poole, that changes this conversation a lot. So we're basing a lot of this off of best case scenarios. And as I've said many times over, you look back in history, whether it was the Shaq Kobe Lakers, the second Bad Boys Pistons, the KG Ray Allen Paul Pierce Celtics, there are certain veteran teams that got into this mindset of, we will be fine. The regular season doesn't matter. We will flip the switch when we get to the playoffs, and we will flip the switch only for nationally televised big games when we've got to show out. If you keep flipping that switch over and over, eventually the switch breaks.
Sure.
And you don't have a switch left. And a lot of those teams got burned for playing that game too many times. Hopefully the Warriors don't do that. Can we talk about the Nets?
Yeah. I'll finish up with this. Then finish up with the Nets. I think the Warriors are wonderful. They've been a great story. I personally don't believe that they're going to win the championship with this iteration of the team anymore.
It's hard to at this point, yeah.
But I will say this: there is something for a lot of these teams that have not gone through the rigors of a postseason all the way through the West Coast Championship yet. So can you trust Zion just coming back in New Orleans? Do you fully believe in them? Super talented, can do it. But, teams, as we've talked about before, teams usually have to lose before that they win. Maybe this is time for Phoenix to be able to come through the ashes and to actually burst through maybe this year, because they
Devin
have
Booker's got to get healthy, and Chris Paul,
like there's a lot of bumps and bruises for a bunch of these teams out there, sure, but maybe I don't. If I got to Golden State and I knew that team was close to fully healthy, and I had to go through and face them for 5, 6, 7 games, I just know I'd be in for a dogfight. Because that team has done it, and they have all the moxie. They have all the coaching experience for it now. They just know how to do it, and there's something special about teams that can get over that hump that way. Your Brooklyn Nets, Joel C. Cortez, happen to be, I don't want to say good, I'll just say warm right now. They've won several games in a row. I'm again not interested in giving them any love. There's certain things about this team I don't like, very much so. But they are second in the East right now, and they have bypassed a bunch of teams. And they are in a spot that I don't think you and I fully thought that they would be in at this point of the season. But they also happen to have one, the servant, the Durantula, Kevin Durant, who, much like he did during the Kyrie's Not Here section of 2020 and 21, he has the impetus to be able to take everything on his shoulders and to make that team perform.
I want to give Durant so much credit, and I also want to point out what else is working, because as you have said, Durant has been this good when healthy over the last couple seasons, and the Nets typically have not been hanging out in second place. You and I, when we looked at this roster, and like, all right, best case scenario, it can be a winning roster. We said that in preseason. They got a lot of shooting. They've got some interesting pieces. They could be a third or fourth seed. They should be a playoff team, but maybe fifth or sixth seems more realistic for them. Second, that's pushing it. That would have been pie in the sky. But what's changed here? Durant continues to play, almost peerless offensive basketball, but defensively, he now is, and I shouldn't say now because he's been this for a long time. He's not just a plus defender. He's been a plus defender most of his career. He is a game-changing defender in a lot of ways. And maybe not one of the true elites in the league, but he's not that far off. He is a game-changer defensively because he tries, he plays with good positioning, he's got excellent instincts, he understands the game, and then he's blessed with that long frame to just be disruptive. And we saw him guard Giannis, in playoff series over the last couple of years where he's given up a lot of size, but he made things work and he just fought on the defensive end. But I look at this team now and I go, the fact that Durant is not leading them in steals, that's Ben Simmons. The fact that Durant is not leading them in blocks, that's Nick Claxton, who's top 3 in blocks in the league this year. And the fact that Durant is not leading them in rebounds, that's Nick Claxton again. That tells me a lot of what I need to know. Durant's not leading them in assists, that's Ben Simmons. You have these other guys who, Simmons is not back to where he was in Philadelphia. Maybe he never will get there. But he went from the beginning of the season where he was pretty much unplayable and they were just trying to shake the rust off to now having a role on this team and a positive contribution. Nick Claxton went from a guy who was like young third string type of center to then getting thrown into the spotlight over the last couple of years and not being ready, even though he'd give you minutes, to now having a role and being super valuable to what they do defensively. You throw those two guys as plus defenders next to Kevin Durant, who's a game-changing defender, and then you still have Royce O'Neal in that starting lineup, who is also a very plus defender. And you start to understand why the Nets have stopped talking about their offense. They've stopped talking about their scoring, and they talk about their defense and what they're going to do to teams that way and how we're going to get stops, and then we're going to build into getting Kyrie shots, who continues to, average 26 points a game, and Kevin Durant doing all those great offensive things that he does. And they have enough shooting, even though Joe Harris and Seth Curry have been a little bit rusty. They've got enough shooting at these other positions that they're a good team, and they're better than we thought because guys are getting aligned into roles, and it's taking some of the weight off of Durant and allowing him to be elite at all of these things, but he doesn't have to be elite at everything every single night. And if there is only one worry that I have for this team long-term as they get into the playoffs, it is the fact that Durant is averaging 30, Kyrie's averaging 26. The next guy on the list is averaging 12 points a game, and that's Nick Claxton. Everybody else is under 10. So there is not that third guy, and if a team is somehow able to take out Durant or take out Irving in a playoff series and slow them, or especially you get into an injury situation, whatever, things change real quick. I don't know that there's another guy here able to pick up that scoring slack, but the good news for them is they've got like 8 different guys, starting with Patty Mills, who's at about 6 points per game, up through Claxton, who's at 12. Everybody in between that is averaging between 6 to 12 points a game, and that is a really healthy number for so many role players to be at that spot. It shows a complete effort and a lot of different options when your top 2 guys are able to be available and elite. So as long as that keeps going, I do believe in the Nets now.
I don't believe that there is anybody that can sort of make up for the Kevin Durant scoring. But I mean, who can? I mean, which team can say that, right? That They can just pick up 30 points from somebody else.
But even the Kyrie scoring, you take that out of the picture, and this gets messy real quick.
Yeah, my issue is that I feel like that they're playing on a little bit of a house of cards. We've seen injuries, especially with Kevin Durant before. He's averaging just as many minutes as he's really ever averaged in a game. He's still having to play a lot of basketball to get to this team. Now, he's not doing it for a team that's middling right now. They've been winning a bunch of games recently, so that's good.
10 in a row.
So it's I don't think I don't think they're winning the rest of their games. So that part's not sustainable. But I don't know how sustainable what they're doing right now is. I do like the fact that I'm going to concur with you that the focus has gotten back on more defense, which is sort of easier for a team like that to be able to control if they're given the effort for it. If you are worried that one of your guys, if they go down, you can't explode with the best of them, try to quiet other people down. You know, that's sort of the best way to do it. And this is not an anti-Kyrie thing. It really isn't. I don't know. Maybe if we start to see Ben Simmons to become more and more what we've sort of seen, and I agree with you, he's never going to be the Ben Simmons we saw. That I think that ship is gone. But he's become a lot better than what we saw at the beginning of the season. He's getting 20 minutes a game now, which is not nothing. And he's producing in those minutes pretty effectively too. So if we see more of that, maybe I do start to see, this to be a little more sustainable. Right now, I just feel like we're really top heavy. We're really top heavy with production, and no one's sort of really been able to shut down Kevin Durant in general throughout his entire career. But cold nights, maybe you shut down somebody else. Maybe you quiet Kyrie scoring and make him much more of a distributor. Maybe that team becomes a little bit easier to defend. But right now, they're humming, man. They're completely humming. And if they can continue something like this, they're on the right path. It's not just about garnering talent; it is about putting people in the right spot. And right now, it feels like that they're working really well right now.
And I think the goal here is Simmons has to get back to the point where he can be your lead defender on your team. And he's shown some flashes of that. Regardless of what he does offensively, we know he'll get some rebounds. We know he'll distribute. The scoring at this point, it's irrelevant, and Brooklyn doesn't need him to score. But if he can get back to being your lead defender so that you're not asking Royce O'Neal, who can get overmatched sometimes if that's his job, or Durant, who's got enough on his plate already, that's a great spot for him to be in. A guy like Joe Harris or Seth Curry and even TJ Warren, who's dealt with injuries so much of his career, all of those guys have been capable of being double-digit scorers previously in their career. You need to get two of those three guys back to averaging about 10 to 14 points a game. You got to be able to vary that out a little bit, and both Curry and Harris are coming off of injuries. TJ Warren is coming off of years of injuries. So there's rust to work through. But if you can get those guys into that 12-point per game score and not lose what you got out of Claxton, it would probably be healthier if Kyrie was averaging about 23 or 24 instead of 26, if Durant was in 27 to 28 instead of nearly 30. I know that probably won't happen because they're so good at what they do. You want to get them the ball. But these other guys just have to knock down a few more shots, take that pressure off, because you are going to have those nights, like you said, in the playoffs where one or both of them is just a little bit off, and you're going to need Seth Curry to get you 20 points, even though that may not normally be his job. He's done it before. He just hasn't done it during the beginning of this season yet, and that's where it's worrisome and that top heaviness you talked about.
They're fourth in the East in point differential, which is not the worst thing in the world to sort of be looking at this point. Also, during this 10-game winning streak, it's not against a bunch of world beaters, to be honest with you. I mean, They got Toronto in there, but I mean, you're looking
Toronto's been down lately.
Right. I mean, you're looking at beating Charlotte and Golden State, as we mentioned. Cleveland's pretty good. Atlanta's pretty good too, but the biggest chunk of this has been against teams that are, middling. There's a lot of teams that are kind of middling. So you could see, teams not being up or down, particular injuries certain nights, you just rest guys. Listen, we're getting into the middle of the schedule. We're about to find out about some teams real quick, starting at the beginning of this year.
Yeah.
All right, Joel, that's going to do it for us for Basketball by Association. I think we nailed this one.
I agree.
Episode, right?
We were clutch, just like Stevie Kerr. Find us on YouTube if you want the video version. Like, share, subscribe over there. Just search Basketball by Association. Ring the bell for us. If you want the audio only version, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes is where you get your podcasts. We will definitely do this again. I think next time I'd love to talk about New Orleans a little bit more, talk about Zion a little bit more as he's coming into his own. We'll get to those folks. Cleveland, man, we got to give some time to the Cavaliers. And this sounds sacrilegious to say this. We had already mentioned them, I think, last time we talked. But as long as they're still sitting in 5th or 6th place, we actually might purposely devote some time to the Sacramento Kings. What a weird thing. What a weird thing to be able to say.
Never thought I'd say that. Never thought I'd be talking about the Kings other than, hey, they're still a team, right?
Sucks to suck, right? Yeah, but
yeah, we'll talk about DeMarcus Cousins and the Kings, right? He's still there, right?
Oh, by the way, my guy Kawhi Leonard is finally coming back to you, so we'll get some Clippers talk. That's always the storylines in the NBA. But a week from now, 2 weeks from now, whatever it is, like all of this could change. So we'll see where we're at.
Sure. Your T-Wolves might be in first.
Ugh.
All right. Say goodbye, Joel.
Goodbye, everybody. I'm going to go cry in my Timberwolves doggy dish now.